Today we'll begin a two-part series on the immunity. And a person is immune to a disease when his body reacts to the presence of a pathogen by destroying it or at least rendering it harmless. And the human immune system primarily functions as to search for, recognize, and eliminate antigens. Now, an antigen is any foreign substance, usually a protein, to which the body responds by making chemicals or specialized cells that directly or indirectly eliminates that antigen. So the antigen is the foreign invader. Now the question is where does immunity begin? Well, the cells responsible for the body's immune responses are collectively called lymphocytes, and it's, remember, a kind of white blood cell that we talked about before. The lymphocytes originate in the red bone marrow. Remember, they come from the hemocytoblasts that are responsible for making these different kinds of blood cells. And during fetal development, some immature lymphocytes migrate to the thymus gland and they become T cells. So there will be B cells and T cells, so it's going to be a little bit confusing, but try to keep them straight. In time, the T cells either will be directly involved in a type of immunity called cell-mediated immunity that we'll cover a little bit later, or will stimulate other cells to produce antibodies. So they kind of have a potential for a dual role. Now, other immune or immature lymphocytes are believed to remain in the bone marrow, and they will mature into B cells. So we have T cells and we have B cells. And B cells are involved in the manufacturing of antibodies, and they deal with another type of immunity called humoral immunity that we will talk about. There's more than one kind of immunity. And as the T and B cells mature, each develops the ability to recognize one of several specific antigens. Now, they can't recognize them all, but they become able to recognize them. So what are the types of immunities? Well, we have this humoral immunity, and this involves antibodies and B cells. Then we have another kind of immunity that's called cell-mediated immunity, and this is like a cell versus cell combat, and this will involve the T cells that we talked about a moment ago. Now let's talk about the humoral immunity a little bit more in detail. So it's produced by specialized cells called the B cells, and they are involved in antibodies that will destroy antigens. Remember, antigens are the enemies. Antibodies are the things we make the good. They're the good guys that will destroy the enemy. Now, antibodies are proteins that are involved in the destruction of antigens, and they circulate through the blood by actually dissolving in the blood or even the lymph. Remember, that was the fluid that could be outside of the circulatory system. And their function is to neutralize a toxin. So, but before B cells can produce antibodies, they must be activated. And the plasma cells are the ones that are responsible for producing the antibodies. We'll get have some diagrams here where you can kind of see how that all fits together a little bit better. So antibodies are capable of fighting antigens in several ways, and one of the ways is they is through what we call neutralization. They neutralize a toxin. So some antigens are themselves toxins. They're poisonous to us, and their toxic effect may be neutralized when the proper antibody combines with them. So in other words, they are poisonous, but when the antibody combines with them, it makes them non-poisonous. It also can function as what we call precipitation. Some antibodies cause precipitation, and that's the formation of clumps of bonded together antigens. And then we have immobilization. The antibodies can cause the immobilization of cells by reacting with their flagella. In other words, they can, if this cell has flagella that for moving around, these antibodies can essentially paralyze the cell. And then we also have another one called agglutination. In agglutination, the antigen is part of the cell, and the antibody causes the cells to form clumps. So it's similar to precipitation in that. Now, humoral immunity. Each kind of B cell recognizes a different antigen. Okay, antigens are the enemies. They can recognize different ones, but each kind of B cell recognizes a different one. And these antigens, when the B cells come in contact, will stimulate the B cell to produce some other types of cells. And one of the cells that's produced are called plasma cells. They're the ones that are actually responsible for producing antibodies. So here we have the B cells in this diagram, the little blue balls with the Y's, or they have all kind of different shapes on them because there's different kinds of B cells. And in this diagram, they have the little squares as being antigens, proteins that are the enemy. And they will stimulate the B cells to form a plasma cell. And the plasma cell, we said, is responsible for producing antibodies. So in this diagram, the structures that are over on the right are the antibodies. And these antibodies that are produced, these little Y-shaped things, are produced by that to make the special little structures for fighting disease. Okay, so notice how the antibodies can, here it kind of shows them precipitating, sticking a bunch of them together so that they can be effectively neutralized. Now, in addition to the plasma cells that are produced, they produce memory cells, memory B cells. And when a B cell is stimulated by an antigen, it can become a memory B cell. And these memory B cells can live for actually several dozen years. In other words, this is going to cause an immunity that would last, for 20, 30 years. And what it enables the body to do is it's now recognizes this antigen, and should it ever appear again, they can rapidly respond to future exposures of this antigen, and sometimes it can react so fast to these that you don't even exhibit any symptoms from being attacked by this antigen. So we have the plasma cell that produces the antibodies, and the antibodies then can cause the clumping that we see over on the right, but the stimulated B cells can become memory cells. They remember, and this little cloud with the little square in the center of it is trying to symbolize that it remembers that antigen. That whenever that antigen appears, it knows exactly how to respond quickly, and the plasma cells can produce lots more of these memory B cells and antibodies to attack it. So they're ready should that ever appear again.